Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes, or use our RSS feed with your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud at vmspod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, on Tumblr at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube. You'll just have to search out Virtual Memories Show. You can support this podcast and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/vmspod and set up your level of support. Every week you'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/vmspod or paypal.me/vmspod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. This week's show comes to you from Beverly Hills. I've got a trade show in San Diego this week, so I came out a few days early to L.A. to record some episodes. This is the third time I've done that, and I'm figuring on doing it again in November. And I have barely done any of the touristy L.A. stuff. I still haven't hit the Getty Museum, which is a big thing that I'd love to do. But I did finally see the Hollywood sign on the hill, which I've never caught in my previous trips. It's on the way to one of my guests. So while I like doing this stuff, I have to admit that it can be kind of tiring. On Saturday, I got up at 4 a.m., flew 6 hours to L.A., got in my rental car, immediately drove 2 hours up to Ventura to record with Howard Chaykin, and then 2 hours back. On the plus side, I spent 4 hours with Howard Chaykin. We did 2 hours of recording plus another 2 hours of shooting the breeze kind of before and after. Howard's one of the formative influences on my teenage comic self, who kind of influences all the later Gills. So it was kind of a blast to record with him. That one's going to come up in a few weeks, but it was an exhausting day, is what I'm saying. And Sunday was kind of rough, too, with a drive down to Laguna Beach to record with Joyce Farmer, and then back up to Hollywood to record with Ben Schwartz. Not the Ben Schwartz from Parks and Rec, but the other Ben Schwartz, who's a writer and a historian of, well, humor and comedy. It's another weird one. You're going to dig that. It comes out in a couple of weeks, too. But what I'm saying is, it seems like all I ever do out here is drive and record, with occasional stops for In-N-Out Burger or a Dodgers game. But yeah, I'd love to do more. It's just kind of difficult, I guess, just given the hours and the times I come and the way I try and maximize the time that I'm here. But, you know, the show's the important thing, right? Now, this week's show is from the East Coast. It's with award-winning illustrator Joe Ciardiello. And I've enjoyed Joe's work for a very long time. Places like Rolling Stone, the New York Times Book Review, and well, a lot of others that'll come up in his bio. But I never thought to, reach out to him. Honestly, the whole illustration world, I never had any entree into until I recorded with John Cuneo a couple of months ago, because he had a book coming out with Fantagraphics. And that kind of straddled the line with comics and illustration and got me into that group. And John is part of this whole, well, we call it a society of illustrators in different ways. And it turns out those guys have pretty fascinating lives and careers, and they're amenable to doing the show with me. I think partly because they were all amazed that I got John Cuneo so at ease for that podcast, knowing how neurotic he really is. So I got to record with Joe, is what I'm saying. Joe's work is primarily illustrative portraiture. During the episode, we talk about why he'd rather not be called a caricaturist, although his portraits do have some exaggerated traits. It's he's a very thoughtful artist, and it all comes out in the course of this conversation and in looking at his work. He doesn't have a book of his own work out there, although we are working on that. But what he does have is 43 years and counting of work as an illustrator, as well as a bunch of awards, the respect of his peers, lovely home and studio. He's something. But here's Joe's bio from his website. Joe Ciardiello was born and raised on Staten Island, New York, just a short ferry ride to Manhattan, where he attended the High School of Art and Design and college at Parsons, earning a BFA degree. Since 1974, he has worked for most major magazines and newspapers, as well as for corporate and advertising clients, book publishers, and record companies. His clients have included American Express, Audubon, BarnesandNoble.com, Capitol Records, Folio Society, the New York Times Book Review, The New Yorker, Politico, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Rolling Stone, Sports Illustrated, Time, and the Wall Street Journal. Among his awards are 4 silver medals from the Society of Illustrators. In 2016, he was awarded the Society's prestigious Hamilton King Award. Joe has been profiled in Communication Arts magazine, as well as other graphic arts journals. In 1999, he had a one-man exhibition of his work at the Society of Illustrators in New York. In 2007, Joe illustrated Elmore Leonard's 10 Rules of Writing for HarperCollins. And in 2011, a limited edition book of his blues musician portraits, Black, White, and Blues, was published by Strike 3 Press. His work is also included in the Taschen book 100 Illustrators. A musician as well, Joe plays drums with the Halftones, an Illustrator jazz group. He lives in Western New Jersey. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Joe Ciardiello. So you've been, we'll say, a professional illustrator, because it's a lot better than a itinerant one, for 40 plus years. How has the field changed, and how has your own approach to illustration? And I know it's an incredibly broad thing to start you with, but what does 40 plus years give you in terms of perspective on this field?
Well, the changes are the technological changes. I mean, the computer has changed everything, so that's the most obvious change within the last 20 years, I guess. But since I don't work digitally at all, other than scanning and sending the jobs by email, I guess I find the fact that there are fewer opportunities. The jobs come less frequently, and I figured, well, I've been doing this what's now 43 years. I guess I can't expect to have the kind of work I was getting, when I was younger. But it's kind of taken a bit of an adjustment to adapt to that kind of change. I think there are more restrictions, editorial restrictions, a little less creative freedom.
In terms of not offending people, or?
In terms of editorial say in an illustration assignment, whereas when I started, art directors seemed to have more autonomy, and they were trusted to find the illustrator appropriate for the job, and more or less left alone. I mean, obviously the editor would have to approve the final. But nowadays there seem to be more people involved in every step of the way, every stage, which is restricting, and I personally find less opportunity to take some risks, some chances, and maybe I'm just too old and lazy now to want to bother. I'd rather just give somebody what they want and move on. So this is a very roundabout answer. I don't know if that's answering the question or not. But
you've listened to the show. Digressions are really where everything comes out.
Yeah.
So. How did you get started, actually? I mean, you were the kid who drew.
Yeah,
right?
I was one of those kids that drawing, since I can, I don't know, whatever, age 3 or 4, and being the first TV generation, part of the first TV generation, television really had a major impact. So watching cartoons, particularly the, back then it was cartoons that were made in the 30s and 40s. And
Max Fleischer sort of
yeah,
stuff.
and the Fleischer Popeye cartoons were just a big deal for me, and that made the biggest impression early on. And that's my earliest memory of drawing, trying to kind of master a drawing of Popeye, which was extremely difficult because it's just a bizarre look of.
There's nothing you're going to pick up from anatomy that's actually going to carry over.
Right. Yeah. So I probably was obsessed a good deal as a little kid trying to draw that. But and my dad, although he didn't make his living as an artist, he was a dentist. But he always loved to draw, and in later years paint, and so I learned also from watching him. He would draw, for me, or he'd copy some comics, and we'd draw together and things like that. So it was instilled very young, and I think when I was. I guess maybe around 10 years old, I took some local painting classes, and Saturday morning kind of thing. And then I was accepted to the High School of Art and Design in Manhattan, and that really changed everything because prior to that, I'd spent 8-9 years really in Catholic school, which was just a horror. And, just daily anxiety and fear, living in fear of nuns, and not the best creative environment. Although I was the class artist, so that made me feel good and also embarrassed me at the same time.
Yeah.
But I can't say I was discouraged in school, but
directed in a certain way, or
well, there's virtually no art at all, so it wasn't really even an issue. Okay. I think I got one time. I remember having to go out into the hall to do a some kind of nativity scene or something on pieces of paper that they tacked up on the wall in the hallway, and I enjoyed that because it got me out of the classroom and I could be by myself, drawing. I don't remember what I did, but
do you remember sneaking in anything fun?
Popeye, maybe.
Yeah, this is in the background.
I wish I had
spinach next to
I wish I had thought of that. Yeah, I was probably too afraid to do anything subversive. Yeah,
but then you got secular.
Yeah, I think Catholic school kind of beat religion out of me, really. Not that I got beat physically, but I watched enough of other kids getting smacked around that I thought this is something's not right here. Yeah, so going to art and design was like being let out of prison, and it was the late '60s, and just the whole world seemed to be opening up creatively, and with pop cultural revolution and music and just everything, and being in an environment that was mixed ethnically, racially. I had never experienced that before. And
you mean the Italian neighborhood where you grew up?
Yeah, it was. I mean, Staten Island at that time was primarily
not
Italian,
the cultural mecca that it is now.
Right, exactly. It was primarily Irish and Italian. Now you do have more of a mix along the North Shore, but the bulk of the island is still, kind of very, very conservative. But yeah, so going to that school was great, and I got into music and took up the drums, started playing in bands, and it was a great time. It was a great school.
How long a haul was it to get to the school and back?
It was 2 hours each way. So for high school, that was quite a commute. But particularly in the winter when it was leaving in the dark and coming home in the dark. It was a long day, and then, doing homework. But I didn't mind it because it was fun, and I met friends on the ferry, and, we'd hang together, and, so it was the walking to the bus and then taking the bus to the ferry and then the ferry, then the subway, and, it was a trek, which I continued after going to Parsons. I still lived at home because I felt, it was close enough to the city, and I was used to the commute.
So who were the artists you were digging in high school? I mean, did you recognize people as influences at the time, or were you still essentially more of a sponge, kind of not differentiating?
Well, just prior to high school, I discovered Mad Magazine, and that, of course, made a huge difference in how I looked at things, and specifically Mort Drucker. I mean, he was my idol, and I wanted to draw like him. So Mort Drucker, Jack Davis, also Bruce Stark, who had work that would appear in the Sunday Daily News magazine each week. Just amazing caricaturists, but it was really Drucker's line that captivated me. And when I went, I specifically remember this, going to art and design for a visit before I was actually accepted there. And we took a tour. I think I went up with my father, and we took a tour of the school, and going into it was probably his junior or senior class. And I saw some kids there that could draw just like Mort Drucker, and that just completely blew me away and also discouraged me. I just said, well, I'm packing it in, like, what's the point now? That, if these kids are this good, I don't know. I don't know if I can hope to. So I sort of veered away from the whole kind of Mad Magazine thing, and at that point, I was more of a sponge and just kind of floating. I think music kind of took over more for me. Most of the classes at school were more like commercial art type classes, as well as some figure drawing and painting. But I think the music started to dominate my interest more. It was more of a social thing, and I was always kind of a shy and solitary kid. So being getting in a band and playing with other people was was a good thing to kind of get me out of my shell, especially performing. Even though I was a drummer, so I was in the back. I was in the back, but I actually did sing, which I can't believe now. But I was one of those singing drummers too, which I would never do today. But
all I've got is the band, the Eagles, and Phil Collins, of course, as the
right, yeah,
the images for that.
Yeah, it's never a good look, but
no, having that microphone kind of dangling down over the set, but. Did you think about going into music?
I toyed with that. I don't think seriously. I think I always knew early on that I was going to somehow make my living as an artist, either a cartoonist or commercial artist, whatever that means, whatever that meant. I wasn't aware of illustration yet. I mean, I really didn't have an understanding of what that was.
There was no vocational aspect of high school?
Well, there was. I mean... But my only association with illustration was TV guide covers and movie posters.
So you get your Jack Davis fix that way.
Jack Davis, right? But also Bob Peak, and the James Bond movies and In Like Flint. Peak didn't do James Bond, but I think he did the In Like Flint posters, and
it's the Coburn movies,
right? Yeah. James Coburn, and of course the Sergio Leone westerns, which figure prominently in my
entire life.
In my life,
we'll get to that.
But those posters too. So, that I knew was illustration, but hadn't yet figured my way into that world. But I did learn more about it in my, I guess second and third year or fourth year, senior year at Art and Design, seeing Society of Illustrators annuals, and we at the school was not that far from the Society of Illustrators, so we did go there to see the annual show. So that really exposed me to illustration. And the turning point was a visit by Murray Tinkelman, who was a chairman of the illustration program at Parsons. He had just taken over as a co-chair, and he came and he gave a pitch in the big assembly in the auditorium. He showed slides. He did kind of his song and dance for Parsons, and it was just terrific. I mean, it kind of blew me away. I saw just another aspect of illustration that hadn't occurred to me before, that I just wasn't aware of. Both his work, some of the other professors there, and some of the student work. And I thought, this is, I think this is really what I want to do. And a good buddy of mine, Chris Spolin, who I'm still good friends with, it struck us both the same way. And so, I applied to Parsons and was accepted, and, went on. Then illustration became, my primary.
I know your father wanted to be an artist, but was he nervous at all about you going into art as a field? Or was he really able to see it as, this is what I wish I could have done? So.
I think it's more the latter, because I have to say my parents were great. I mean, they were always very supportive and encouraging of me drawing. And so I never felt that kind of, are you sure this is something you want to do? Maybe, that fear of it, he's not going to be able to make a living.
Yeah, just the unemployment.
Right. I never got that sense from them. Now, they may have secretly worried about that. But
all parents do.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. I think they worried more about me going off by myself into Manhattan every day on the subway. And, people talk about how bad New York was in the... in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. I don't recall having that feeling at the time. So it became just second nature. This is how you got around, and everybody, But I'm sure it concerned them. But again, they, to their credit, they didn't discourage me, and they were pretty supportive about me pursuing that. And I think my dad kind of felt I would have liked to have been able to do this. So, I think he was happy to, plus generally I was a good student, and, as long as I was doing well, I think they probably felt good about that.
Now, when I interviewed John Cuneo, his seeming, I won't say original sin, but the problem or the flaw at the base of everything, according to him, was his lack of an artistic education.
Yeah.
He doesn't know who he would have become had he actually had that opportunity at a Parsons or something like that. Do you see it as that critical to who you became and the development you had as an artist? Or do you feel there are aspects that you still had to figure out outside of a Parsons education? Because I figure you need something else to beat yourself up about, the way John has that to beat himself up.
Believe me, I've got plenty to beat myself up about. And I think John would have been the brilliant artist he is, regardless of whether he went to art school or not. For me, I needed to go to a school like that because I'm not sure I would have found. I mean, I don't know. Who knows? But I don't know. I would have found the kind of track that I pursued had I not gone there, because it was in my second year that I had a class with Jim Spanfeller, and he was instrumental in showing me an approach to drawing that I was not familiar with before. That just really clicked with me, and prior to that, I was just, I don't want to say floundering, but there was nothing that I felt I could latch onto in terms of a direction or any big desire of what I wanted to pursue. I was trying everything, painting, conceptual illustration was the big thing when we were in school, and but in Jim's class, drawing from the model, but with his approach that was largely based in blind contour, but just really encouraging expressive drawing, and kind of putting everything else aside that we've learned in all our other figure drawing classes, and about anatomy and everything, which is all necessary and important to know. But here was an opportunity to just really have fun and understand that drawing can be fun, and that was new to me, and I don't know that that many other people really were picking up on that in his class, but it really clicked with me, and I felt very strongly about pursuing this direction and working with a fine pen line and enjoying drawing, really enjoying drawing. And if I hadn't had that opportunity, I'm not sure how I would have
discovered it on your own.
I obviously I would have pursued something, and I imagine I would have found my way into illustration and a career, but not sure what my approach would have been. I guess it's interesting to ponder that.
I'm imagining you with tons of like pencil roughs and all these things you don't do.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
But that, so that kind of gave me some clarity and focus, which I've pursued ever since then. And at the same time, I also discovered the work of Alan Kober, who was, emerging then. Well, by then he was already, a star in the illustration world. I'm talking, this is maybe 1972. And I discovered his work, seeing it in magazines. And it was almost simultaneous with Spanfeller's class. And there's a similarity in the drawing approach. So that sort of one reinforced the other. And I thought, well, here's somebody, I can see, how his work is being applied, in magazines and books. And then Jim Spanfeller suggested, if I like Kober's work, I should check out Leonard Baskin. And so it was those three, I'd say, that really became my, what's the word I'd want to use? I mean...
I would say Holy Trinity, but that would get you back to the Catholic school
that's
thing.
True. But yeah, that's what they would be.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of...
Which is better than, Dick Tracy and Dondi from the Daily News and all that stuff as your...
I guess. Although I did love the Dick Tracy comics.
Are you part of the cult of Chester Gould?
I wouldn't say the cultist, but I appreciated his work more later, I think. At the time, I think I was, as a kid, I was probably a little puzzled by it, but... now, when I look back on that work, I really I dig it.
The batshit crazy hyperviolence is actually something. Right. I get this as a response to.
Right.
You've stuck with music your entire, I don't want to say career, your entire life, which is better than a career. Does the music have any influence on what you do as an illustrator? And I know you get asked that in a bunch of different ways, but does either the drumming or the whole, being part of a musical group, provide any either balance or somehow?
Well, balance is an interesting way to put it, because it's nice to, after being isolated here at the drawing board, for hours and hours, days on end, to have that opportunity to play and with other people in a creative environment, but doing something completely different, that is a nice trade-off. I'm not sure how it affects the work. For the longest time, I kept the two separate. I just felt that's one part of my life, and this is the other aspect of my life. And
I'll note that there's a drum kit next to the drawing table, but go on. Yeah.
Never too far away. But at a certain point, I went through a period of working in the 80s where I was very busy, but I was doing a lot of unsatisfactory jobs. They just weren't fulfilling creatively. They were basically money gigs. I was grateful to have the work, but I was getting seriously burnt out and kind of depressed about what I was doing. I was seeing other people doing more interesting things, and I felt like I was in a real rut and didn't quite know how to get out of it. And an art director, a friend of mine, Patrick Flynn, who at the time he was art director of the Progressive out in Madison, Wisconsin. He had been in New York prior to that, which is where I met him. In fact, he lived on Staten Island for a while. But he moved back to the Midwest, and he was art directing the Progressive magazine. And he suggested he had me doing a Nat Hentoff column on a regular basis for the magazine, and most of them dealt with jazz. They were little spot drawings, but we talked about doing some sort of promotional thing for me, and utilizing some of those drawings, and then he suggested we do a book and of jazz drawings, and he hooked me up with a writer, John Kruth, who's a musician and a poet and a writer. He's written a number of music biographies and a really tremendously talented, creative guy. And so John wrote poems, jazz poems, and I did the drawings. We worked separately. I mean, I would do a bunch of drawings and send them to him, and he would write some poems. And these would, it was an opportunity for me to just play, to get back in touch with just drawing for the sake of drawing, and in a way that really pleased me, a way I wasn't able to do on a lot of these assignments I was getting, which were much more idea-oriented trade magazines and business publications and electronic publications, and it was really dry stuff, and I became very formulaic. I was using a lot of the same cliched imagery over and over again. And
from my days editing those sorts of magazines, I put out guidelines that included the no use of communication is key to a win-win relationship. So yeah, I'm on the prose side. I'm quite aware of all those cliches that you have to keep recycling.
So doing these jazz drawings, portraits. They were portraits of jazz musicians, and I was into jazz, and it just seemed like a natural thing. And as I was doing them, I'm thinking, why did I avoid this for so long? I mean, this was a natural fit. There's an element of spontaneity and improvisation to the drawing, because I'm drawing directly with pen, without any real preconceived idea where, I mean, I know I'm doing a drawing of Thelonious Monk or Miles Davis, but, I'm just starting to draw, and we'll see where it ends up. And that really gave me tremendous pleasure and excitement. Again, it was kind of like a shot in the arm. And so I started sending, even before, we ultimately had a book, like a self-published book done called Like Jazz. But even prior to that, I started just making, Xerox copies of these drawings and sending them out to publications. And the response I got was really great. I was suddenly doors were opening to publications that I wasn't getting in before. And, Rolling Stone, GQ, Esquire, The New Yorker. I got a regular gig with Jazz Is magazine, doing essentially the same thing except being paid for it and doing them in color, because these drawings were all done in black and white. And so, I think the book itself came out in 92. And I'd say it's no exaggeration to say that really turned my career around for me. And that's when I started doing more portraits / caricatures. I hesitate to use the word because I still don't consider myself a caricaturist, because I think of the greats, Hirschfeld, David Levine, Ed Sorel, the masters of caricature, and even contemporary people like Steve Brodner, who's just a contemporary master. I feel like my things are more, they're more expressive portraits, or I don't know what. And I do cross over into caricature, but I don't do the kind of exaggeration, and I guess I don't feel I'm making a point with the features, exaggerating. And
I always fall back on the Lyndon Johnson appendectomy scar Vietnam thing, and that's very
Levine.
different than what you do. The Levine caricature. Portraitist, exaggerated portraitist?
I don't know. It's, I don't even know how to categorize it. And, caricature is the easiest thing, and that's the easiest fit for most people to just kind of put me in there. And okay, I'm fine. I'm fine with that because, but that's not how I see myself, at least not for the things I do for myself anyway. First, for jobs, I guess. I think I lost my train of thought.
I tend to do that to people. But what I wanted to get, though, was the idea that, like you were saying, the line is actually improvised in those in a way that, it would seem that your jazz background influences your art.
Yeah, I mean, it may be a stretch, but, and I'm certainly not conscious of this when I'm doing it, but if I have to reflect on it and think about the connection with music, I can see, that improvisational nature and even a rhythmic nature to building up certain areas, leaving other areas freer, using space. I like the concept of less is more in music as well as in art. And one of my all-time favorite drummers is Steve Gadd, and he's just a master of less is more. And I never thought I would mention his name in relation to what I do.
And not the drumming.
Absolutely not my drumming, but although he is, somebody who I've...
Cuneo did clue me in and ask me to ask if Steve Gadd is God. That was, I figured I'd hit him up just to say, any questions for Joe? But
well, yes, he is. Steve God, as some people call him.
Yeah. Now, if there were a battle of bands that artists and cartoonists are part of, you're part of the Halftones.
That's right.
Jazz group. Would you beat the cheap suit serenaders, the steel tips, and the action suits? Is there a hierarchy of
the Bende and the Zipatones?
I don't know them.
No,
Who's in that one?
That was back in the I guess late 70s, early 80s. Elwood Smith and Lou Brooks.
When people knew what Zipatone was.
Yes, yeah. And Mark Allen Stamety would sing and do his Elvis.
I just think any band that had Joe Coleman in it was probably more hardcore than anyone else.
Right,
but, and Patrick McDonald on the drums. And
Yeah. No, Halftones were mellower. This is more of a jazz and funk, jam bandy kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask, you mentioned the Society of Illustrators. Can you talk a little about your Society of Illustrators, like the people you're pals with, in the sense of, just knowing other, we'll just say illustrators rather than caricaturists or cartoonists or something, sort of building up that we'll say fraternity, because we're almost all guys, but that sense of a community that you've had over the years?
Well, yeah, a good deal of my friendships are with other illustrators, and our kind of immediate group of John and John Cuneo and Barry Blitt, and Tim Bauer, Steve Brodner is a great friend of mine who I've known a long time. And we get together, or try to get together on, some kind of regular basis, and over various people's studios, and that camaraderie is great, and it's good to bounce ideas off, and the downside is we tend to live far apart, so we don't get together that often. I mean, we talk on the phone, but or email, but I think we all enjoy when we can all kind of sit around, shooting the shit. And
do you have more Illustrator friends than non-Illustrator friends in your life?
Nowadays, I'd say yes. Yeah. I think, when I was still living on Staten Island, I was still more in touch with, kind of some of my older friends, and even more musician friends. But, I'm pretty isolated. I mean, you see where I live out here, and I don't get into the city nearly as much as I used to. So, there are friends out here, many of whom are artists that I've met because my wife is also an artist and a painter, and we've met. There's a whole group of artists in the area that have become our friends here, and it's interesting. A number of them were former illustrators.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting thing. My wife also was an illustrator, and she refers to herself as a recovering illustrator.
I was going to ask if it's considered retired or recovering. That's
but it seems most of the former illustrators that I know from out here have all moved on to painting, to fine art painting. And
you see yourself going in that direction? I mean, I know you do work.
I don't ever see. I'm not a painter, and I don't ever see myself going. No. I mean, I'm having a show at the Hunterdon Art Museum in September.
So what brought you to Western New Jersey to begin with?
Well, the need for more space,
which we're rapidly filling up.
Yeah. Yes. Now, I don't know how Susan and I talk about, we're in our mid-60s now. Talk about scaling, downsizing. I don't know how that's going to be possible, but because we're running out of space here, and it's just the two of us and our cats. They don't take up too much room. But the house on Staten Island just became one giant studio between the two of us and all our stuff, and I knew that. If I didn't get off the island before I was 50, I was going to die there. And so, we looked around, and
because I've long joked my whole thing about Staten Island. I spent as little time there as possible. But when you look at the New York City Marathon, you realize it's entirely built for people to get out of Staten Island as fast as possible. It starts on the bridge, and that's the only step you take inside the borough.
Well, for most people, it's that, and also just taking the ferry over and getting back on and leaving again. But there are, there are wonderful aspects to Staten Island, and
I goof. I come from New Jersey, and everybody's got their stereotypes about us too. So.
Yeah.
But coming to Western New Jersey.
So I had some friends that were living out here, so I was familiar with the area from visiting them. They had moved out from Manhattan, illustrators also, and a house came on the market. They told us about it. We took a look. Sue really said, I think you really need to see. She saw it first, actually. I think you really need to look at this place. And it was this outbuilding that was the selling feature. To have a separate building to work in. This second floor where I am was raw space. We renovated this up here. I originally was going to work downstairs, and I spent one winter down there, and it was freezing, and the floor was cement, and it was uncomfortable. And I said, did I make a mistake moving out here? And then I was warned about potential flooding because we're next to a creek by one of the neighbors who I said, I wish I'd known this before I bought this place. And I decided I'm moving my studio up to the second floor. And so...
Because if the water gets here, there's a lot more to worry about than just, your career. So.
Yeah. So... So it was really, having the space. And I think, I was ready for a move. Sue had lived in Manhattan she's originally from Ohio. But she had been in Manhattan for over 25 years. And she moved to Staten Island with me. But we were both ready for a change. And it was kind of idyllic out here. I mean, it's a beautiful area, and
I'm down. Again, I live 25 miles from New York City. There are deer, bear, wild turkey, foxes now. Everything just trundling through my yard. Mm-hmm. It's hundreds of yards of woods behind our house because it's all protected watershed stuff.
Right.
So, the idea of having New York close-ish, but not, right on top of you, I find perfectly fine.
Yeah, and also Philadelphia. So I'm kind of smack between the two cities.
Now, your wife's an artist. How does the two-artist household hold up? And I think it's worse for prose writers than for visual artists like you guys, because prose artists would tend to be writing mean-spirited things about the marriage the whole time. But how does a two-artist household work?
Well, it seems to be working out. The biggest problem we have is because Sue works downstairs. We have competing either music or, if I like to listen to something, podcast, maybe yours.
Oh, I'm the cause of strife in your marriage. I knew it.
I had to bring this up, Gil. I'm sorry. But,
she's standing outside with a knife. I'll shut the son of a bitch.
So I've had to buy headphones, and that seems to solve the problem. My tapping is an issue because I'm constantly tapping my feet or tapping my fingers on something. It's the drummer in me or just the nervous energy. And I'm not aware I'm doing it, and I'll hear yelling at, "Stop tapping! You're tapping your foot." So, but other than that, and, we seem to work out like she often works outdoors. Mm-hmm. So she's painting plein air. So she's not here a lot of the time. Or she's in the house, the computer's in the house, and she's doing things online. And sometimes works out here very late at night after I've, I probably, 11, 12 o'clock is usually the limit for me these days. Whereas she's sometimes out here, till the wee hours. So, we sometimes overlap, but oftentimes we're not here at the same time. So most of the time I'm in this building alone, and I'm perfectly content.
What's your work routine, or do you have a schedule, or is it based on assignments?
Deadlines obviously determine everything, but I'm generally 10:30, 11 in the morning till 11 at night kind of schedule. Obviously going inside for meals, but that's
peeing in the woods. I'm just kidding.
It's a problem not having a bathroom out here. But.
It teaches you to moderate your caffeine and everything else.
Well, it gives my exercise walking the 50 feet to the house.
Do you have the one of my past guests is Creota Wilberg, who has a whole cartoonist's good posture guide for how to keep from destroying yourself at the drawing table?
Oh no,
you all destroy yourselves emotionally.
I've destroyed myself. I get really bad back pain, and I put away the special seat that I put on my drawing chair, just because I knew you were coming. No, it's too late for that. I'm sure I've done serious damage.
But it doesn't measure up to the emotional damage. That's okay.
Well, that's true. I mean, that goes without saying. And sitting at the drums doesn't help either, actually, being hunched over. So, I mean, I try to get out and walk. I mean, I do try to make a point of that and go down to the river and in Frenchtown and walk along the river and the trail, and I really enjoy that. Or up to the park, up the street. But for the most part, I'm in this building.
Over a table, and which you made a career out of.
Yeah. It paid for this place.
Which will be buried in. I'm just kidding. Now, when we're talking about that society, community, camaraderie aspect, did you have a holy shit moment in terms of like John Cuneo saying that the first time Ed Sorel actually spoke to him was, oh my God, this is, had you had any of those moments when you were, recognizing that one of your idols was now treating you like a peer?
Oh, yeah. I think anybody who you've really admired, whose work you've looked at for years and years, when you've reached a point where they consider you, I don't want to say a peer, but
it's okay. I think they tend to be charitable enough to,
But yeah, that's an amazing thing. I mean, I've had a number of instances like that with various people, and Mark English was, just extremely kind to me on a number of occasions. Who I don't know him well at all, but he's gone out of his way to say complimentary things to me, which just always blows me away. And
anyone who hasn't praised you that really pisses you off that they've never said anything, you can tell me off mic.
We'll pass on that.
You won't even acknowledge my existence. Yeah.
I've one person who I've really had the pleasure to have a long friendship with now, over 25 years, is Robert Andrew Parker. Mm-hmm. And I mean, he's somebody who I was, again, one of those early idols of mine, and admired his work for many years, and would go to see his exhibits of his work, and I bought a couple of prints of his early on, and then got to meet him and know him. Just extremely nice, generous guy, and I mean, I have a ton of his artwork now and books, a lot of his books here, and he just turned 90. They had a big 90th celebration up at his house, and he's also a drummer, and he has
So I think you're just ripping him off this whole time. That's
5 sons, 4 of which are drummers, and so I've sat in with his band, and he and his wife have spent time down here with us, and it's just a wonderful relationship. With somebody who I've admired so much, and I now consider a friend. So yeah.
Do you find yourself having any sorts of do you see that continuing in time? Do you see younger illustrators at all reaching out to you? Do you see your influence on those guys? And do you see your stuff getting plagiarized by those guys? It's sort of where everything leads.
I do see that occasionally, but I mean, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And
Blackman was good enough not to name the person that he was.
Oh yes, I
pissed off about.
I heard that. Yeah. Well, I was accused in the early days of ripping off Alan Kober, by Kober himself, who I have tremendous respect and admiration for.
No, it's homage.
And that was devastating. That was devastating to me. But
did it make you change what you were doing?
It didn't, because it really didn't, because I felt like I was on a path somewhere, and I knew that I need to go through this to get wherever it is I'm going, and I also knew that he had the same process like all artists do. There are people that you're influenced by, and you learn what you can from them, but then you move on, and you eventually, I can see the influences in my work. The influence of his is obvious, I think. I still get some people still make those comparisons.
But that's what art has been.
It's always been that. Yeah. But I also see, I can still see Mort Drucker, in there somewhere, and Leonard Baskin and Jim Spanfeller and Bob Parker and Milton Glaser. I mean, any number of people that, Jack Unruh, especially if you're working in line, pen and ink and watercolor, you're inevitably going to be compared to others that work in that medium.
Narrow, I don't say narrow pool, but right. There's a certain.
I mean, even among my colleagues, we all tend to get lumped in together. I mean, often I get mistaken for John Cuneo, and I don't know if that happens to him, and Barry Blitt, and
I was going to go with Blitt.
People see, there are obvious differences, but we all share some of the same influences, and work in the same medium, and the comparisons are inevitable, and
appear in some of the same magazines.
Yeah, and to people that don't pay all that much attention, they tend to lump you all, one pen and ink guy is the same as the next, and the fact that those guys have just kind of left me in the dust is, even though I've got a few years on them, no, we're all good friends,
and everybody thinks everybody else has passed them by, so it's okay. Did you feel that you'd hit on your style in the course of those jazz drawings that you were talking about, or when did you feel you were drawing like what you should be drawing?
I think that was the beginning of it. I mean, I should go back because that's not entirely true. I always felt I had a direction that I've been pursuing since college. So the work hasn't changed in any kind of dramatic way. Hopefully it's gotten better. I think I've gotten better. I don't know. Sometimes.
What do you think you've gotten better at?
Well, drawing, I hope. Although there are days when I really
it's just as frustrating.
It just has not. I'm actually going backwards. I think, Jesus, I was doing better work, 20 years ago. I hope that's not the case. Maybe not. I'm not objective enough to know for sure, but I hate a good deal of what I do, but when I do a drawing that I like, that's reassuring, and I know, okay, I can still do this, and I know where I want to go with this stuff. But it's a kind of thing where you almost have to turn your brain off, or a part of your brain off, and forget about how this is going to turn out or what it's going to be used for, and just get in touch with that joy of just drawing, and that's the hardest thing, is just to turn that, all those voices inside the head that's just like, this sucks. Who are you kidding? You've been fooling people for this long, but you can't fool them any longer.
Imposter syndrome can carry us a long, long way.
Really?
I'm telling you.
Can it?
Do you feel your work's a progression or a battle? Or is it good when it's a progression and bad when it's a battle?
It's a battle. It's a struggle. It doesn't get easier. That's something I've learned, I think. I thought it would get a little easier, but it hasn't. I mean, it's still a struggle, and I'm a procrastinator, so it's that's an internal battle that I struggle with. So just getting forcing myself to sit down at the drawing board and get to it is often, especially if it's a job, an assignment that I just, I don't want to do, or I know is going to be a challenge, it's going to be difficult, and I'll put it off, and of course, social media doesn't help at all. I mean, the distractions are just...
Yeah, I deleted Facebook from my iPad and iPhone, and now I have the rule of I don't actually read anybody's stuff. I'll click in to see if... All I do is pimp out the podcast on Facebook now. I don't write anything about my life. I take pictures on Instagram and they cross-post to Facebook, but I don't actually comment on anything. And I don't read anybody's feeds, and I don't know what's going on in anybody's lives. And all things, on balance... It's worked out pretty well.
And you're able to conduct your life, and
it's been about 6 months. Nobody seems to have noticed that I'm not in their lives anymore.
Wow!
And that's for they see these pictures. It may as well be a robot that's just posting, pictures of Gil and this, that, and then I'll have a picture of an abandoned farmhouse that I saw on the drive over here. Things, but I don't actually partake, which is monstrously selfish. But for artists, you guys are supposed to be monstrously selfish to begin with,
right?
So.
Right.
I'm just saying, this might be a direction
for you.
And
I admire that. I admire that you're able to do that. That's real discipline that I'm not sure I have, but I have thought about, I need to try this because, it's definitely addictive. And you're constantly seeing what everyone else is doing, and it just makes you feel terrible about yourself.
Yeah. There's that aspect too, I'm sure. Yeah. In my case, it was just the not really wanting to share what's going on in my life, particularly, and realizing that, nobody needs a birthday wish from me, outside of people I know really well. Right. Let me ask something about another aspect of your work. And it's about the subject matter. A lot of the things I've seen of yours in recent years have been literary portraits, writers, artists, in that vein, not the musicians. We're surrounded by books, but you much of a literary reader? Or is it more just this is the assignment, let me figure out some things about Edgar Allan Poe or this one or that one?
Right. I'm not an avid reader. I'm embarrassed to say this.
There's nothing to be embarrassed about. You have a career and a life. You make music, you make art,
I read tons of articles, whether they're online or magazines. And I have... Well, you can see I've got stacks of books, but I tend to immerse myself in whatever specific project I'm involved in, and then read about that. So I do prefer biographies and historical nonfiction as opposed to reading novels.
Sure.
So
this interview's over. I'm leaving.
I don't think I'm a complete illiterate, but however, I love drawing authors. And
why is that?
For some reason, they're fascinating to draw. They have fascinating faces. This is a blanket statement, an overgeneralization, but I find that to be the case because I do find myself interested in drawing authors. And when I had the opportunity with the New York Times Book Review to do portraits on a regular basis of authors, I loved it. I mean, it's something interesting about drawing their faces. And
what sort of research would you do for some of knowing that they're weekly and you're not going to spend your time reading all of Beckett to be able to draw Samuel Beckett?
Right. Well, mostly it's Google images and finding images. But I would read some snippets and if it was an author I wasn't that familiar with. An example is the John Cheever cover I did. I wasn't that familiar with Cheever. I knew.
I just started reading him for the first time.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I hadn't read him. I knew the name, of course, but I didn't know a lot about him. And I approached it the way I normally approach. I have to say that Nicholas Bleckman, who was the art director of the book review at the time, he was terrific in that he gave me the total freedom to do these drawings the way I draw for myself, which is directly in pen without any no pencil,
sketching, no pencils.
Not having to show them a sketch for approval. Right from the get-go, he said, I know what you do and I want you to do, and I thought, wow, because I'd always wanted to work for the book review, and that was just an incredible opportunity. So,
Achiever.
So I got a bunch of photos of him, and then I found online and just started drawing, and I had some drawing. What I'll often do is just it's kind of a mind game I play with myself. I obsessively draw. I mean, there are stacks of paper over there with drawings and doodles, and where I'm just drawing, finding any spare space on the page to draw. It's almost like an exercise. And I know that by doing that, this can't possibly be used for anything. I'm just kind of warming up, or false starts, whatever you want to call it. And so I was doing that with the Cheever thing, but what often happens is I get something that I really like, because now I've done something that I was not uptight about, and I was totally free, but now I like this. Now what do? It's overlapping other drawings, and there's stuff here, and I got to scratch that out or white this out, or what I did was I started doing some research online about Cheever and reading about his life a little bit, and it started to occur to me that some of these overlapping drawings were an interesting possibility in a kind of a concept of a duality and his issues with alcoholism and homosexuality, and I mean there are all kinds of things that seeing overlapping heads of his, slightly different, and I liked what was happening. So the only time I think I did this, I scanned it and sent it to Nicholas. I said, "Hey,
can we work with this?"
Yeah, here's what I'm thinking. And it was for a cover, so I knew the pressure was there. That's why I needed to play that game with myself. What do you think? And he really liked it. He goes, "Let me run it by the editor." And he goes, they're fine with it. It just needs some more emphasis, some like dark black areas, just because it's a cover, obviously. Yeah. And I knew that anyway, and so I finished it up, and they ran with it, and that was a case where that really kind of worked. It often doesn't work out that way, and almost never am I able to just draw without having to get approval on sketches for jobs for anybody else. So,
but it's nice to be trusted.
It's wonderful to be trusted.
You ever thought about cartooning? Either multi-panel or long form stuff, or you like drawing? It doesn't
interest me. I don't. I have thought about how I would approach a graphic novel type of thing, and it wouldn't be in the traditional panel. That doesn't appeal to me, but I do incorporate a lot of text and words in my drawings already. So, I can see doing something along those lines. But again, to come back to the Spaghetti Journal, that's the closest thing for me. And I call it a graphic journal, not a graphic novel. It's obviously not a graphic novel.
Tell us what it is. Let's start from the beginning with that. What is the Spaghetti Journal?
It's the connection between Italians and Americans, and based on the mythology of the Old West. Really the pop culture of Italy and the U.S. Based on the mythology of the Old West. So, in that incorporates spaghetti westerns, which I'm a huge fan of, and also the concept of Buffalo Bill being the first true celebrity and international celebrity, touring Europe with the Wild West show, Puccini seeing the Wild West show as a young man in Milan, and later writing La Fanciulla del West, which was the first real spaghetti western opera that premiered at the Met with Enrico Caruso and in 1910. And all of this started because my grandfather, my mother's father, years ago, the first book I ever illustrated, just a couple of years out of school, was a kid's book, and it was a biography of Buffalo Bill. And at the time I was working on it, I was at a family dinner at my parents', and my grandparents were there, and my grandfather just very nonchalantly tells me that he saw Buffalo Bill and the Wild West show when he was a young man. Now, he immigrated from Italy in 1906, and I think he was 15 years old at the time. I don't know exactly when he saw the Wild West show, but that just fascinated me. And at the time, I wish now, in retrospect, so many years later, that I had really grilled him more about this experience. And I didn't. It just was just stuck there in the back of my mind. And, about, 15 years or so ago, as I was thinking about what I want to do with my career going forward, personal projects, what am I interested in doing? And I was going in the Museum of Modern Art bookstore and just browsing in bookstores. And there was a book on the shelf by Sir Christopher Frayling called Spaghetti Westerns, which I have over there on the shelf. And it just kind of jumped out at me. I pulled the book off the shelf, and I swear this sounds ridiculous, but the whole thing came flooding into my head. Yeah. That thought about what my grandfather had told me about Buffalo Bill and Wild West. This book of spaghetti westerns with a picture of Clint Eastwood on the cover, and it just struck me that, like, I think there's something here. This is like kind of a fascinating, intriguing sort of project to so I just began researching it.
Sort of the nexus of the Italian-American experience, the Western.
Yeah, I mean, I started with that book, and I already had been a fan of Sergio Leone and the films from when I was a kid, when I first saw them. But then I started to explore some of the lesser-known spaghetti. I mean, there was like 500 of them. Yeah. Most of them are awful. But I started to watch a lot of them, the better ones. I was renting them, or buying a few. And then I was reading a lot of books on Buffalo Bill, books on the Italian-American experience, and doing a lot of research online. And I was coming up with connections that I just had never thought existed before. And so I was taking tons of notes. And so this has been ongoing for, like I said, 15 years. Now, I didn't start in earnest drawing until maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Were you uncertain what format it was going to take, or you just...
I wasn't ready. I was accumulating all this information, just doing the research. In my spare time and in around assignments, I wasn't ready. I didn't know how. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to approach it, but I knew there was definitely potential for something there. So that's that was the impetus for this thing.
And you see it as primarily. We could tell people it's on your blog, the Spaghetti Journal.
Yeah, there's a Tumblr. Joe Ciardiello's Spaghetti Western. Spaghetti Journal.
Spaghetti Journal. But illustration with with text.
There's handwritten text. On the blog is
descriptions.
There's some description. I mean, ultimately, I see this thing as a book. I've already been pitching it around to several publishers and have already gotten a number of rejections.
Nice job.
Thank you. Proud of that. There's no question it's a hard sell. There's not a big audience for that's clamoring for this kind of a book. There's a handful of baby boomers and a few Italian guys on Staten Island that may be interested in it, but and Staten Island factors into this thing amazingly. Buffalo Bill performed for 2 seasons on Staten Island. At the time, there was all this space there to set up, arena for a Wild West show, and the encampment where the Indians and everyone lived. They lived there, and even a train tracks were laid to take people from the ferry to this part of Staten Island where the thing was set up, and also the first silent westerns were filmed on Staten Island.
Yeah, what was the weirdest thing you learned in the course of research? What surprised you the most?
Well, that about the early westerns was surprising. Not the Great Train Robbery, which was filmed in New Jersey, I'm pretty sure, but at the same time, or right around the same time, the subsequent ones were filmed. A place called Fred Scott's Movie Ranch, which I can't find any information, very little information about in Staten Island archives and things. But
somebody is smart on the internet. Surely they're going to tell you where you're wrong about, wherever it is.
Oh, I'm sure. But I may be factually stretching things on some of it, but hell, this is my project,
And does it incorporate? It seems from the panels that I've seen, memoir aspects also, things about Joe.
Yeah, I'm trying to incorporate, my childhood, because growing up watching this stuff on TV and westerns, and there's an immigrant story in there. There's indirectly, the gun culture, the cowboy mentality, of this country, the mistreatment, the genocide of Native Americans.
The casinos.
There's something.
Yeah.
Mobsters. There's a wealth of material. I almost have to kind of cut myself off at a point because I've got piles of notes, and I'll never finish this thing if I don't.
Well, yeah, without having a circumscribed limit.
Yeah, and so I've got it to a point now where I've presented a sort of a dummy layout.
And you have a gallery exhibition of it?
Oh, there's at the museum. That was their decision. The women that came out curating the show, they wanted to, have a show of my work, but they specifically wanted to be that project, or some of that project. So I don't know. It seems some people seem to find it interesting.
I'd buy it.
I have, I'm kind of 50-50 with a publisher right now who I won't name. There's a chance, maybe long shot, but we'll see. I have to finish it first. So that's the thing, I'm about 2/3 done. So, I've got to kind of move my ass, and it's a kind of incentive now to really.
And I take up your entire Sunday, some schlub from New Jersey with a couple of microphones. Who do you love drawing the most? Is there a subject that you just, or just someone you draw idly on your own?
I think anyone with I like drawing people. So, anyone with a really interesting face, where you can get lost in the line work and just, Keith Richards has a fascinating, even Mick Jagger, any of the Rolling Stones. I mean, Christ, they, those faces draw themselves practically. I do a lot of musicians, but I also like to draw historical, people. I mean, left to my own devices, I'm drawing a lot of old men, I guess, because they're interesting to draw. Attractive people, especially women, young women, are really hard to do.
I think it was a Cuneo conversation where he said, I had to tell Entertainment Weekly, I'm not drawing the cast of Friends again.
It's that's always been a tough one.
Selling art to the subjects of your drawings? Have people said, I want to buy this drawing you did of me?
Yeah, that happens on occasion. The most interesting case over there on the wall is a framed letter, 2 letters actually, from John Updike. He bought the drawing I did of him for the book review. He sent them a letter asking if, I'd be willing to sell it. And then he wrote me a nice letter by hand when I sent him the drawing.
Became prized possession?
Oh, yeah, and that was 2 years before his death. And, when something like that happens, it's Kurt Vonnegut many years ago also bought a drawing I did of him, and that was quite a long time ago. And there's been others, not a tremendous amount, but oddly enough, the more pop culture celebrities tend to want it for free. Yeah. They don't expect
that characterizes the entire culture. To just do the work for the exposure. Right, you'll get paid by somebody else sometime.
I think in their case, they're so used to getting everything for free. This is what why wouldn't you want to just give it to them?
Now, last question. I promise. I'll let you get back to the Spaghetti Journal. Cuneo asks, "How the fuck do you keep rapidographs working?"
Well, he knows that we have had countless hours of conversations about pens and nibs, and I just, you got to keep using them for one thing. You can't let them sit for any length of time, and you do have to clean them on occasion. But it can be done. The problem I find is now actually the dilemma is the new ones are just not up to par, and I'm seeing a point where I may have to switch. So I've been racking my brain trying all, I've used all kinds of pens over the years, dip pens, fountain pens, technical pens, and I do still, I'll use microns and dip pens occasionally. The rapidograph is still my primary tool, but I'm seeing a time when I may have to give over to the micron because once these old ones give out, the new ones they're getting jabbed in the paper, and I don't know what they're doing. And I've written to the company, and they sent me some points to try, and some of them were good, and some of them weren't, and so.
I remember it was like Eddie Campbell, the cartoonist. There was a stretch where Zipatone was getting out of the business, and he was apparently just running around buying as much Zipatone as possible to be able to use on his own. I will say, honestly, all I use the pen for is taking notes on this paper, but it took me a long time to find this. I have boxes and boxes of these pens because it's the right thickness, the right line. I can, and this is not my livelihood, and I care that much about that.
So you can imagine.
Even finding the paper was also kind of a
don't
hassle.
even get me started on paper.
I'm going to get you started on paper. That's the last thing I'll ask about. What's the...
just finding a paper that's suitable for your... Yeah, I'm obsessed with line. Line quality, to the point of really almost sickness. I've got stacks of sketchbooks over here, and it's not that I don't like drawing in sketchbooks. I can't find paper that makes me want to draw. It has to just feel right to me. the way the pen reacts to the paper, and the consistency, and if it's just not right, I'll do a bunch of doodles in the thing, or I'll just put one line on one sheet and
it's done.
That's it, And same with the paper that I work on. Paper surfaces change. I tend to work on watercolor paper, so depending on the sizing that's used, or whether it's hot press, cold press, the textures vary. The amount of drag on the pen. It's like I have to be. All conditions have to be perfect for me to
converted.
I have to forget about that, so I can just draw the way I like to draw. It's got to feel right. Yeah. It's all about feel, and so that's just an obsession that's ongoing. And I know the perfect paper, the perfect pen probably doesn't exist, but you keep searching.
I had a business trip to Barcelona last year. Everybody in my business world was going, oh, we'll be able to run around here, get this, buy that. The one thing I looked up was a stationer over there, because I knew they carried this particular pad that I get from a South Korean company that they ran out of them in New York. And I thought, oh, fuck it, I may as well buy about 30 or 40 of those and just bring them back in my suitcase, which puzzled the customs people a lot when they were looking at the form, and it was just like $100 worth of pads. That's the only thing you came back here with was, but we all have our obsessions.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I understand perfectly.
Joe, thanks so much for coming on the Virtual Memory Show.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure, Gil. Thanks for having me.
And that was Joe Ciardiello. I adore his work, and after we wrapped, we checked out the flat files to look at some of his newer work, and I just plotzed. I mean, a lot of it was wonderful, and some of the spaghetti journal items were there, and they're just amazing to look at. But while we were going through a bunch of the New York Times book review portraits, I came across his Philip Roth, and I offered to buy it then and there. He demurred, but we'll see if he comes around. There's a picture of me with the drawing at our Instagram page. The Instagram handle is VMSPod. Just go there. You'll see a picture of me holding up the Philip Roth next to me. You can check out more of Joe's work at his main website, joeciardiello.com. And I'll spell that. It's JoeCiardiello. Also, go to joeciardiello.tumblr.com, and that you can check out his spaghetti journal work there. It's gorgeous. Like I said, now that I've seen it in real life, I mean, it's nice on screen, but when you see the pieces themselves, I just can't wait for the exhibition that he's got starting in September. It's that work is really something to behold. Now, this one was recorded at Joe's home in Western New Jersey, so there were no tolls or parking fees. I did head over to Frenchtown nearby and pick up a cold brew coffee after we wrapped, and I brought Joe and his wife a pie from Auntie Elle's over in Tuxedo, New York. But otherwise, this basically just cost time and gas. Still, if you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories show, like web hosting, travel, and equipment, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. A special thanks go out to Kevin Katila, John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Wallace Wilde Minozzi, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, and Ron Slate for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories show. We've got the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode, as ever, is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. David's got a reunion project going with his great 80s band, David and David, and you can find out more and support that at facebook.com/DavidandDavidMusic. And that's it for this week's Virtual Memories show, coming at you from Beverly Hills. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week with one of the guests I recorded with this weekend, but I don't know who. Might be Howard Chaykin, could be Joyce Farmer, might be Ben Schwartz, could be Graham Chaffee, who I haven't recorded with yet, so I'm not going to guarantee anything. You'll have to come back to find out. Till next time, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes of the show at the iTunes Store or at soundcloud.com/VMSpod. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, at Tumblr at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and at YouTube. Just search for Virtual Memories Show and you'll find about 50 or 60 past episodes. And if you like this show, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for this podcast. That'll help us build a bigger audience. Till next time, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.